If you still think Chinese biotech is mostly a cheap licensing shelf for Western pharma, this week should update your model. Merck just had a strong ADC week, but the important part for the rest of the industry is this. The molecule came from China, the platform came from China, and one of the flashiest new data points still comes with exactly the caveat people keep trying to skip. Great progression-free survival is not the same as settled global proof. This video is about sac-TMT, Merck and Kelun-Biotech. The angle is simple. Do not ask only, did Merck win? Yes, Merck had a good week. Ask the more useful question. What kind of win was it? What evidence tier are we actually looking at? And what does it tell us about how Chinese biotech is changing global oncology?
First, what changed? On May 18, 2026, Merck said the Phase 3 TROP2 005 trial in recurrent or advanced endometrial cancer hit both overall survival and progression-free survival against physician's choice chemotherapy. That matters because Merck called it the first TROP2 ADC to improve both OS and PFS in that setting. Then on May 21, 2026, Kelun put out the ASCO abstract details for OptiTROP-Lung05. In PD-L1 positive first-line advanced non-small cell lung cancer, sac-TMT plus pembrolizumab delivered not reached median PFS versus 5.7 months for pembrolizumab alone, with an objective response rate of 70.2% versus 40.0%. That is the headline layer. Now the more important layer. These are not the same type of evidence. The endometrial readout is a global Phase 3 result, with both OS and PFS hitting. The lung cancer readout is exciting, but it is still a China-led study. The median follow-up was only 10.5 months, and overall survival was a positive trend, not mature final proof. If you flatten those into one generic China biotech is crushing it take, you are throwing away the part that actually helps viewers think better.
Now, the mechanism in plain English. sac-TMT is a TROP2 ADC. That means the antibody part is used to find tumor cells expressing TROP2, and the payload part is a belotecan-derived topoisomerase I inhibitor meant to damage DNA once it gets delivered. Kelun says the differentiation is the linker design, stable enough to hang on in circulation but able to release payload in the tumor cell environment. That sounds like chemistry trivia. It is not. In ADCs, the boring linker and payload details often decide whether a drug is just interesting or actually competitive. And this is where the China-specific part becomes global. Merck's own May 2026 trial explainer says sac-TMT was developed by Kelun-Biotech and is now being studied in 17 ongoing global Phase 3 trials. KPMG's 2026 China Life Sciences Sector Overview and Outlook, citing Vision Life Sciences data, goes even broader and says 90% of global ADC licensing activity is linked to Chinese assets. So this is not a quirky one-off anymore. Western pharma is not browsing China for optional pipeline decoration. It is going there because the asset quality is now too real to ignore. But do not swing from denial into hype. The practical way to score this week is to separate 3 buckets. Bucket 1, platform and deal quality. On that front, Kelun looks more legitimate every year. Bucket 2, evidence maturity. That is mixed. The endometrial story is stronger today than the lung story because it already includes overall survival and progression-free survival in a global Phase 3 setting. Bucket 3, practice change. That is still open, especially in first-line lung cancer, where toxicity trade-offs and comparator choices matter a lot. Look at the lung data carefully. The efficacy looks strong, but the same Kelun release says grade 3 or higher treatment-emergent adverse events were 55.3% with sac-TMT plus pembrolizumab versus 31.4% with pembrolizumab alone. That does not kill the regimen. It does mean you do not get to talk about the efficacy without also talking about the price of that efficacy. And this is where some investor-style coverage gets lazy. A hazard ratio is not the whole story if the regimen changes tolerability, sequencing logic, and real-world uptake. There is another caveat people miss. OptiTROP-Lung05 compares against pembrolizumab monotherapy in PD-L1 positive disease. That can be a meaningful standard in selected patients, but it is not the same question as whether this regimen should reset broader frontline NSCLC practice across every chemoimmunotherapy context. So yes, the lung result is important,
No, it does not automatically settle frontline NSCLC globally. It upgrades the asset, it does not end the debate. What could fail from here? A few things. Overall survival in lung cancer could mature less impressively than the early PFS picture suggests. Safety could limit how aggressively clinicians want to use the regimen. Global regulators and guideline bodies may want more context before treating a China-led first-line study as enough to reset practice. And on the business side, the rush into Chinese ADC assets could keep pushing licensing prices higher, which may make future deal-making less forgiving for buyers.
What are people in the West still missing? I think they are still using the wrong mental model. The old model was Chinese biotech does cheap early work, then Western pharma decides what is real. The newer model is harsher. Chinese biotechs are increasingly generating the asset, the platform know-how, the early clinical velocity, and sometimes the first registrational signal too. Western pharma is often arriving later with global development muscle, commercial infrastructure, and a bigger logo. That is still valuable. It is just not the same power balance. So what should viewers watch next? Watch whether Merck gives fuller TROP2 005 numbers, not just top-line language. Watch how ASCO discussion frames the lung trial, especially around comparator logic, safety, and OS maturity. Watch whether more Western companies keep expanding from one-asset China deals into multi-asset platform relationships. And watch whether competitors respond by building better ADC chemistry in-house or by writing even bigger China-origin licensing checks. My opinionated wrap-up is this. This was not just a Merck week. It was a Chinese biotech validation week, with caveats attached. The headline is the win. The real story is which parts of that win are already global proof and which parts are still very strong but not fully translated yet.